to about 5 years into my fairy journey. And by fairy journey, I mean, at this point, I had made contact. I had begun working with these beings. I had not only begun working with them, but I had had the remembrance then of that being who I was at a soul level, which was like a whole nother can of worms that opened up. And then I had also had this huge realization and awakening around my purpose being connected to fairy. So I was deep. I was deep in working with the fairy realm. I was deep in bringing forward healing, a beautiful healing technology that I called fairy light healing at the time. I was deep in all of this. And it was actually 2012, and it was around my Saturn return where everything started to crumble. And what happened is that prior to that, and to give you like context, I had been training. I never trained with a human in terms of my work with fairy. All of that has been mentored by my allies on the inner planes. So that is where I have received all that I know, that I share about fairy, and it's also all of the remembrances that I've had. So it just comes from my own experience and my own embodied, truth. That being said, I have had many beautiful and challenging human teachers in the psychic and healing arts, and I want to give so much credit to those early teachers, because had it not been for their training in the psychic arts, I wouldn't have had the tools to be able to have these beautiful communications that then evolved over time. Okay, so I'm deep in these communications, right? And so for whatever reason, and I think it was maybe because it was the magical child in me that was leading, the child does not ask those questions from the head that we adults want to know. The child just trusts. It just is, right?
Yes.
If an elephant is purple, they don't say, why is the elephant purple? They say, look at the purple elephant and how can we bring it flowers or whatever. It's like the questions, there are questions, but the questions are different. They're not the questions that we ask that limit the experience. So I don't know to this day why I hadn't asked the question before. But to me, when I worked with fairy, I worked with a multitude of beings that for some reason I called all of them fairy. Many of them were very different. And by that, I meant they usually fell into two categories. One were what I would call more nature spirits. They were connected to the spirits of trees and forests and plants and rivers. Okay, these were nature spirit energies. I called them fairy. And then these other beings were great shining beings. These shining beings that maybe in some people's repertoire could be confused with even angels, but they were very deeply rooted and connected to the earth. Well, how did I know that? I just knew that. I knew that from the way that they expressed in their energy. I had worked with angels at that time too, and they had a different frequency than angels. Mm-hmm. But to me, I just grouped it all in fairy. Never asked any questions. The way that I worked it out in the mind, is that I told myself that, like the nature spirits are just the ones, the younger souls, the younger spirits, and the ones that were large and great and shining, if you had to make them, I hate to do it. Can I do it? Can I do it? They're like, one last time. So like the great shining, by shining, I'm like Lord of the Rings elves, right? Like these grand presences. Okay. Those are not like freaking Tinkerbell. They're like, oh, no more forms. We're breaking forms. I'm like, yes. I'm sorry. I won't do it again. So anyway, they abide.
So they look like Lord of the Rings. Okay. With you.
Oh God, I'm never going to live this down. They're going to give me hell for like the next year. Another 100 humans are talking about us like we're Lord of the Rings elves. Great, Diomira. Thank you. You've just set us back 10 years. Oh, I know. Okay. So you guys, we're going to see that, and then we're going to release that because we're breaking through expectations and connotations, right? And so I just saw those energies, those beings, as I just thought, okay, those are when they get to a more evolved state, and those are like sovereign in their consciousness. They are the same way we would say an evolved human might be an ascended master, right? Or might be enlightened. I was like, oh, these are like the ascended aspects of Fae consciousness. That's how I worked it out in my mind. Okay, well, the year 2012 happened. A number of things, which I'm not going to go into right now, started happening that made me start questioning that simplification. And what it ended up resulting in, first of all, was about 3 years of confusion to the point where I actually stopped teaching, because I was like, you know what, if I'm not clear about this, I just can't teach right now, because I need to be clear about this. And I have in question, like, okay, who have I been talking to? It wasn't that I thought that anything negative, or so nothing like that, but it was almost like this, like my whole identity started unraveling. Like here I was so confident that this was just the fairy frequency. This was the fairy realm. And I was talking to beings in the fairy realm. And it was this moment that a number of things started happening where I started to realize that they were two completely different species. They're two completely different beings, completely different. It'd be like comparing an angel to Bigfoot. It's like, okay, they might have, I mean, they're both interdimensional beings, angels and Bigfoots, right? I'm making a very extreme analogy. This is not a one-to-one correspondence, but they're both interdimensional beings, but hello, they are not even in the same like gene pool. Not even close, right? A mer person, a mer energy, and Bigfoot, different gene pool. It's different species. They're both inner earth species, meaning beings that exist on the interdimensional planes of the Gaian system, but they're not related.
It's like the human and dog.
Yes, exactly. Or, even, I mean, even, and I've made this analogy before, and I wonder if it's more correct, and I'm, again, still in an inquiry, but it'd be like comparing, a zebra with a wolf. They're both in the animal kingdom, and yet they're not even like the same at all, right? They're completely different species. And so this was how what started to happen is this whole breakdown. And as the breakdown happened, I started to make some sense. And here's what I've worked up. And this is how I see, and everybody sees this a little differently. I just did a fabulous interview that'll be released soon with a person, and he and I had a great conversation because he also works with these beings, and we talked a little bit about this. So everybody has a little bit of a different cosmology and perspective, depending on how you work with these inner realms. But this is how I've worked it out. The nature spirit kingdom, and we can put in that kingdom the Davic energies, which are like the highest form of the nature spirit kingdom. Those are like the earth angels, right? The nature spirit kingdom is also what I would, in a lot of ways, connect with the elementals. These are what a lot of people are working with, the elemental energies, the nature kingdom energies. These energies are beautiful, but they are not the fairy people who I'm talking about. The fairy people who I'm talking about.
Music for that, like
we need popcorn. We need a drum roll.
Blackout. We'll see you next week on part.
Yes.
Although we're already into part 2, so sorry.
We're already into part 2. Sorry.
Okay, I'm at the edge of my seat. What?
Okay.